You're listening to the Flickcast, a podcast about stuff nerds love. I am Chris Ulrich, and joining me, of course, my co-host Joe Dilworth. Hey, Joe, what's going on, man?
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited. We have a really cool guest on the show today, Rich Handley, author and editor. But you probably know him better than I do, so maybe you want to throw an intro, and then we'll go right to Rich.
Yeah, absolutely. Rich and I have been friends probably about as long as you and I have been. And of course, the big draw was our mutual love of all things sci-fi and stuff like that. So we'll get into that with him. But yeah, he's author, podcaster. The guy is just phenomenal and knows his stuff, especially about Planet of the Apes and Star Trek. So why don't we just get right into it with him?
That's right. Let's do it. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Rich. We really appreciate it. How are you today, man?
Doing well, thanks. Doing well.
I can tell that you're sitting outside. So do you do work outside mostly, or just you're not necessarily sitting outside, but there's a window at least?
Well, I have a home office. I work down in my basement. I'm a guy who never leaves his basement, and so there was a door and window right behind me, and I hear birds a lot. And hopefully they're outside and not in my head.
Well, so you're not down in your parents' basement. You're in your own basement. That's a switch,
right? Unless I'm a time paradox and I'm my own parents, in which case I am in fact in my parents' basement.
That's weird. I never thought of that.
I'm like Zyphod Beeblebrox the Fifth,
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
That's not a deep reference at all. I'm sure people know who that is, right?
Yeah, there are 12 people listening going, I get it, and the rest are going, what? Yeah.
Exactly. Or just 12 people listening. That could be too.
That's also possible, yeah.
Well, that happens too.
I like to think our numbers are slightly better, but you never know. Maybe I'm deluding myself. I'm not in a basement. I'm upstairs, but it's almost the same thing. You guys can't hear my dog barking, can you?
No.
Okay, good, because she does that
nope.
sometimes when she feels lonely. But I understand that. It was COVID, so we were all locked at home. Oh, did you do anything special? I don't want to say it that way. That sounds weird. Did you do anything special during the pandemic? No.
Oh, wow. Well, let's see. I've for a couple of years, I've had this set of 32 Dark Shadows pulp novels from the 60s and stuff. From this, that, frankly, are known for not being very good because they were written by a man who'd never seen Dark Shadows. And but I had them sitting on my shelf, and I thought, I'm not leaving the house because I've become. I mean, during the pandemic, I went into full lockdown. I became a hermit, and I said, there will never be a time when I will have more time. And I read all 32 of them, and frankly, I'm not sure all my brain cells survived the ordeal.
Nice. So well, go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say I also know that you co-edited and wrote a book during the pandemic, or at least towards the tail end of the pandemic.
I didn't do anything like that. No, I did. Yeah, no, I actually. I mean, there was a productive period, weirdly enough, but it was because I couldn't see people. So I actually had several writing projects during that period of time, and I'm ironically doing less now. Now that it's a safer place, I'm doing less work. So go figure. But I think it was, like with the Dark Shadows novels, I think it was a coping mechanism to just try to push out as much work as I could, because then I wasn't thinking about the state of the world.
Oh, that's
exactly.
Good. That's smart.
Yes.
Yeah, we started doing the podcast again. That was our therapy, kind of. So.
Hey, if it works, it has value. I think most Dark Shadows fans would say it takes extreme circumstances to get you to sit through those 32 novels. So these were extreme circumstances. And if the podcast and the Dark Shadows novels got us to the point where we are healthy now, that's a great thing.
Definitely.
Well, I know that one of the surprising things for me during the pandemic was a book that you and I had pitched resurfaced again, and that was our lovely Stargate book. So that was a pleasure working on that with you. So
yeah, so Chris, the story behind that is that Joe pitched that to me because I've done about 10 books for Sequart anthologies about different franchises, and Joe had said, are you a Stargate fan? And as it happens, I very much am. And he said, "Well, how about you and I pitch one to a book in that series to Sequire, because Joe's contributed to a number of those anthologies."
Right.
And they said no.
Yeah.
And they said, "Well, we don't think there's, we're not convinced there's that much of an audience." And I don't know if they just changed their mind in the interim, but in the midst of the pandemic, they suddenly reached out and they said, "Hey, remember that book we said no to? You guys want to do it?" And yeah, which I was very glad about. And it was a very enjoyable experience, and we had so many good writers turn in some really stellar stuff.
Yeah, I don't know enough about Stargate, unfortunately. Joe was kind enough to mention the whole idea and the opportunity, but I had to respectfully decline because my Stargate knowledge is minimal, unfortunately. But I do know
You're
something.
right. You were on the list. I remember
yeah.
that. That's right. I remember that. Because we each had people we were nominating and then letting each other know to cross names off. And I remember him saying that, yeah.
It's like jury selection or something. Yeah,
Right, exactly.
I mean, I've seen all the Stargates, obviously, but I never was I don't know, I guess after Kurt Russell and James Spader, I didn't really jive with the series that much, even though I like Richard Dean Anderson. It just didn't do as much for me, so I don't know.
It took me about 6 or 7 episodes. I had enjoyed the film. I wrote about this in the introduction to the book. I had enjoyed the film. It was never like I had a problem with Stargate. But I had enjoyed the film, but I felt I didn't need to know more. So when Stargate SG-1 started, I wasn't watching it. And several seasons in, several friends of mine who were stunned to find out that I, the geekiest person they knew, wasn't watching SG-1, kept pushing me to watch it. And I said, well, I just, look, it seems fun, but do I really? I mean, Richard Dean Anderson as Kurt Russell, that's just weird to me.
Yeah.
And
Agreed.
It's kind of like you're going to do a continuation of Star Trek, and you hire like Jim Varney to play Kirk. It just seemed that different a person, and so. But they got me to sit down, and I sat through 6 episodes and said, "What am I watching? This is terrible." And they said, "Just keep going." And they were right, because the very next one so pulled me in. And then from that point on, I was very transfixed on the show.
Well, it's kind of funny because, people complaining about the, streaming and paying for services and stuff nowadays. Stargate SG-1, the series originally aired on Showtime, which was a paid service then. And so that's why I never watched it for its first 5 years. I loved the film, but I never watched the show because I wasn't going to pay for Showtime. And then when Showtime canceled it, it went to Sci-Fi, which, hey, look, that's part of my cable package. So I was able to catch up with it then and quite enjoyed it and thought it was fantastic. So for you young whippersnappers complaining about streaming services, there used to be shows on highly paid services back then that we couldn't watch. So
you needed a box to descramble them at one point. So
I know.
It's not even fair at all. Now it's so easy to find things. Not that you would.
It's funny when you mentioned the box. This was like probably like early _90s. We had a descrambler on our television, and that's like basically tantamount to admitting theft on a podcast, which is really stupid. But we had a descrambler on our box, and then one day it didn't work anymore. And I had a friend who was really tech oriented come and look at it. And he goes, "Well, you could replace it, but I think what's happened is they've upgraded how they're doing this." And he brought this little thing shaped like a bullet, which was a descrambler, scrambler, descrambler, and he attached it to the back. And it worked again. And I said, "You got to be kidding." He's like, "Yeah, right now you're descrambling their scrambled signal. They're scrambling your scrambled signal. And the bullet I just put back is descrambling the descrambled, scrambled signal." So I was really committing theft.
Yeah.
What was it? What were you trying to watch that was so important back then?
Just whatever channels it could pick up. I don't even know. Because, this was the early 90s. Sure. There were a handful of paid cable stations, and as you said, they were expensive. Knowing me, I was probably hoping to get porn, but I didn't.
Hoping to get some Skinamax, as they used to call it.
Right, exactly, yeah. But
hey,
So I don't even recall what we were watching at the time. Just that it amused me, and then years later we moved out of that place, and I was taking everything apart, and that technology had become obsolete, but it was still on the television. So I'm like, my God, the bullet! I totally forgot about this thing.
It's probably a museum piece at this point. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there's a nice little thing of VCRs too at the time. For a period of time there, you could play around with the dip switches on it if you had the cable going into the VCR and then to the TV, and you could slightly descramble some things. It's like, I think that's a spaceship or
Right.
or that is a softcore porn movie. I'm not quite sure which
Space
it is.
boob.
But,
Or it's an avocado. Honestly,
right,
who knows?
right, or it's a cooking show. I can't really tell.
Right, exactly.
So, good times.
But we don't advocate stealing, right? Right?
No.
Theft is bad, kids. Theft is bad.
Pay for your material. Pay for your content, everybody.
Yeah. So for those of you that think torrenting is a new thing, there was many layers and evolution of piracy before that. So
It's not piracy. It's just
I mean, there was actual piracy at one point.
right.
It was, yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yes.
Not that we participated in that, of course.
There were seagoing vessels stealing Game of Thrones episodes.
There you go. It was the most pirated show, right? So,
Exactly.
so Rich, do you remember? Because you're a geek, like you said, the geekiest, nerdiest person that people know. Do you remember when you first sort of discovered this whole thing? Like, what was your entree into sci-fi or into geekdom? Do you remember that?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. And I'm not telling you. No, I'm just kidding. So
That's fine. I can tell you mine if you want.
that's my secret, man.
right.
I'll take it to the grave. No, my mom was a first-generation Trekkie, and like really, she's just like I am. And so I was born in 1968, the year Planet of the Apes came out, and Star Trek was still on the air, and stations were running reruns of The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits and One Step Beyond and so forth. And my mother introduced me to all this stuff. So I grew up in a house in which my mom would be all excited because at 4 o'clock Star Trek reruns came on. And so I watched it with her. And in this area of the United States, there was a weekly film showcase called the 4:30 Movie. And every week there were themes. So you would have... the theme weeks that they had were actually kind of amusing because they'd have Horror Week and Monster Week and Godzilla Week, and these were all great. And Planet of the Apes Week, they had Gidget Week, and I've told this story to a few different people. It always just struck me as really funny that the 4:30 Movie did science fiction, horror, and action films, and Gidget,
Yeah.
which is just. What like why not Julia Child's Week? Right? Like it's just so random to stick Gidget Week into the middle of all that. But anyway, so once or twice a year, the 4:30 Movie would have Planet of the Apes Week, and you'd get to see, weirdly enough, 4 of the movies because they split the first one into 2 parts. So you had to
Weird.
wait till I think it was Science Fiction Week to watch Battle. Very, very strange setup. But anyway, so between all those things, I grew up very much into this stuff because my mom saw it as something to share with me. Now, my sister had absolutely no interest and fought to get the remote control so she could watch Good Times.
Also a good show,
And
by the way.
it was a very good show, just a very different taste than me and my mother. And I can remember, though, when it changed from just being something I watched to being fascination to the current extent, and that is Star Trek The Motion Picture. Because when that movie came out, my mom bought me a couple of books that were published to tie in, and it was, what was it, the Space Flight Chronology, B. Joe Trimble's Star Trek Concordance, and a set of blueprints for the New Enterprise.
Yeah.
And I was just blown away that these things existed. 12-year-old me said, "What? The Holy Grail, and the Rosetta Stone." And next thing, I was 12. 1980 allowance was approximately what you would now find and just scoff at and leave it on the ground. So. But it was enough that I could, go to the store, and there were a couple dozen books at that point. I started grabbing novels when I could afford them and reading them, and it all went from there. And then, I kept up with the other things. I was always a Planet of the Apes fan from early on, and so forth, Twilight Zone. I grew up in a sea of this stuff, and I just kept swimming.
That's great. Yeah,
Which was not a metaphor I was intending to say, but it came out.
It worked out, though. It's a good way to talk about it. Yeah, my parents were not into this at all, but my mom kind of let me do whatever. I've told Joe this story before. It was basically, we moved around a bit when I was a kid, and I always remember being able to turn on the TV, and I saw that Star Trek was on. It was just ending, and I still remember the frame that it was on. It was Kirk running towards a shuttlecraft. It was freeze framed. I don't know which episode it was, but I remember that, and I felt like everything was going to be okay because this was this familiar thing. We just moved into a new place. I didn't know anybody, and it was great. And so Star Trek was my entree, and also I love Planet of the Apes, of course, but I think Star Trek was my thing. And then, like you said, the blueprints and the technical manual, the Starfleet technical manual, I picked that up. That thing's awesome. I still have it, and the blueprints probably too. I'm sure I have all that stuff still.
Oh yeah. Well, I've bought those
by the
things
way,
a
I'm
few
going to
times.
assume. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to talk over you.
That's all right.
I was just going to say I've bought the blueprints and the technical manuals a few times over the years because of various moves and endings of relationships. I lost them, but it was like I gotta have those.
Your girlfriends kept stealing all your technical manuals. That's
I know, yeah. Well, and it's funny. It's interesting you guys mentioned because my mom was also my entry into sci-fi. I mean, and I say this with no hint of humor at all. My mother was a horrible parent, but she was a great best friend and great geek friend, and was I think I was more her buddy and was able to watch all these things and read all these things and discuss them with her, and so I thank her for that, and that's where I got into sci-fi and all that. And much like both of you, I've always been a huge fan of reference books. I call them reference books for things that don't exist. I eat them up. I love technical manuals for sci-fi shows. I love reference books, and that's kind of how, actually, that is how Rich and I met, because he was doing that for a while, writing reference books and chronologies for things that don't exist, and that's where we got kind of connected.
That's cool.
That's how we met? I actually was thinking about that the other day. I was trying to remember how we first connected. It was Hassline. That's how we first met.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, okay. I don't know. I think somehow, like over Facebook or online.
Wait,
or
you interviewed me. I just realized what it was. You interviewed me was it for Pop Culture Zoo?
Yeah, for my old website, and I was like, these books are awesome. I got to interview this guy.
It came back to me because of your phrase, reference books for things that don't exist. I remember you mentioning that phrase, so it just started coming back. Yeah.
Yep. So I appreciated that you wrote those. Even helped proofread a few of those, and
well, I recognized a kindred spirit. That wasn't difficult to figure out. By the way, to circle back for a second to your memory of the shuttle, my mind immediately went to the episode Metamorphosis. So I'm wondering if that's the episode you watched.
Actually, when it came on, it was that exactly. The credits were rolling, and so it was like a freeze frame from a still from whatever episode it was, but they were rolling the credits over it. So I don't know what it was that I had watched.
Because I was trying to figure how many episodes involving the shuttle was Kirk going toward it, and I thought, well, the only one that came to someone else will point one out. I mean, there's the way to Eden, but I'm thinking Metamorphosis, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're probably more right than I am. I tend to think that I'm a pretty big, nerd or geek or whatever you want to call it, but I can tell that I'm in the presence of the masters now because I guarantee I wouldn't have thought of Metamorphosis. So, sorry, Joe, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say too that I would. I was going to seg that into. I don't know if there's anyone on the planet that knows more about Star Trek and Planet of the Apes than Rich, and I'm not saying that just to butter him up so that he'll give me more work later, but. I think that's true. Just based on that right there. I mean, you said, there's a still frame of Kirk doing this. He's like, oh, yeah, that's probably this episode.
I will say that people like Larry Nemechek far surpass me. I appreciate you saying that, but there are people who far surpass. Larry could walk circles around me when it comes to this stuff. But I'll accept the title about Star Trek comics if it's. I'll specify that one. That's my.
I agree with you
expertise.
There. Yeah.
Although Mark Martinez might actually share the throne with me.
Well, I'll give you that crown for Planet of the Apes, man, because you know apes better than anyone, and I don't mean that in a weird way. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't. That's just rumor, man. It was in college. No, but
it was the pandemic. I was
exactly. I was lonely. But the thing is, the Planet of the Apes was basically the first franchise my mother and I fully got into, and so while it's a far smaller franchise than the others, yeah, I really threw myself into that one. probably to an unhealthy level. Frankly, I think my wife is a saint because when she met me in 1987, I was already like this, and she still dated and married me.
Wow.
So yeah.
That's very good. So, my entry into Planet of the Apes was Rod Serling because I was a huge Twilight Zone fan. So, the fact that he wrote the movie, especially or helped write the movie. I guess did he write the Planet of the Apes movie?
Basically the first draft. He wrote the earlier draft, and then it was someone else took it over. Meg Wilson rewrote that. I'm stumbling over my words.
That's
Sorry,
right.
I'm trying to stifle a cough. But never stifle a cough. You'll feel like in your head like it's
I know.
bouncing
Joe can
around
tell you how
there.
much I cough on the show. It's
Yeah. So he wrote the earlier draft of the script. And what's interesting is on YouTube, at least it used to be, I don't know if it's still there, somebody took Planet of the Apes, put it in black and white, and changed the music to the Twilight Zone. And it works brilliantly as a 2-hour Twilight Zone episode. It really, really does.
I like that.
And because it's basically the Twilight Zone. I mean, when you think about it, you've got a science fiction tale with a message and a gotcha ending. It's pure Twilight Zone.
Well, he was the one that came up with the gotcha ending, right? Is that where
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
Well, the original novel by Pierre Boulle has a gotcha ending, but it's a totally different gotcha ending. Yes. Weirdly enough, it's the one that Tim Burton uses.
Right, that's right. He shows up with Apes, yeah.
Right, except that unlike the Tim Burton one, it works.
Yeah.
So in the novel, it's really cool.
Sorry, we shouldn't spoil Planet of the Apes. Sorry, everybody. Spoilers if you haven't seen the movie from 1968. I apologize.
Yes.
Yeah, for the same 12 people who've never seen.
They're on Earth the entire time. Everybody, sorry, it's all ruined now.
Except in the book.
The real surprise of Planet of the Apes is that they are actually cats wearing ape suits.
Exactly. The real
in the novel they're on the planet Soror. Yes. And that's what for people who I just spoiled the book. Don't bother me. Okay. But for people who pick up the 5 novelizations thinking they are in fact novelizations, it's often confusing because 2 through 5 are novelizations. 1 is Pierre Boulle's novel, and it doesn't even take place on Earth or have a character named Taylor. So it throws people, but it's a really cool book.
Yeah, I tried to read it after I saw the movie, and I didn't. I guess I had too many Charlton Heston moments in my head, and I couldn't get into it too much. But I didn't have that problem with other books. But for that one, I remember just not digging it. I think it's probably because I love the movie so much, and it was just hard to.
The thing is, that film is, and I hate using the term iconic. I actually try hard not to use it because it's one of those words like awesome that is just severely overused. Everything is iconic or awesome. But if you watch, you read blogs or you watch YouTube videos, the word iconic is in every damn sentence. And when you look at clickbait sites, the word iconic is everywhere. But Planet of the Apes is an iconic film. And it is one of the few, I think, that really deserves the term. And I think that's the reason why it's hard to read the novel after watching it many times, because the performances and the aesthetic and the names indelibly get just burned into your head. Yeah. And it stays there, and you mull over it for hours. And so you suddenly, to meet a main character named Ulysses Moreau and see the apes, in 20th century technology, it's very jarring. Yeah. But if you're able to put that aside and read it for what it is, it's really a fascinating novel. And what's really interesting is that the two bastard stepchildren, so to speak, of Planet of the Apes are the cartoon and Burton, and both of them have more in common with Boulle's novel than anything else.
Yeah, I'm sure. I probably read it when I was a kid, when Planet of the Apes, when I first saw that. So it didn't really, it didn't stick with me. But I wonder if I could revisit it now. What would make a difference? But I was curious, since we have like Joe said, we have a Star Trek expert. You've obviously watched all the series many, many times, I would imagine. I just was curious because Joe and I have been sort of recapping Strange New Worlds on the show lately. Mm-hmm. And we did that with Discovery and stuff before. So what are your thoughts about the new incarnation of Star Trek? What do you think about Strange New Worlds?
I think Strange New Worlds... Well, first of all, let me back up one second and say that my favorite series is Deep Space Nine. So I put that as a very high bar. I grew up on the... Yeah, I grew up with the original, obviously, and the animated series and Next Generation. So for me to say the fourth show is my favorite it's not like I came in at that point. It's actually surprising, I would think, that it's my favorite, given that I grew up on the other ones.
Right.
But I think Deep Space Nine was the first one to truly have a fully realized cast of characters, where they weren't just background players like Geordi who stepped in and did things and then stepped back out. Like, everybody mattered on Deep Space Nine, and there were these intricately woven plot lines and character arcs, and I absolutely adored it and still do. And I mention this because I think Strange New Worlds is the first show of the new era to fully make me embrace it as much as I did Deep Space Nine.
Well,
Yeah, I agree with you that it's kind of yeah, I guess I see the ties to Deep Space Nine because of, we still have a story of the week, yet we have these threads and character development that go over multiple episodes, and I feel like Strange New Worlds just perfectly found the balance for that.
I will admit that I don't know what I know Joe's reactions to the show because he and I briefly discussed it. But Chris, did you find the season satisfying?
I did. In fact, I was going to say that I would agree with everybody that it's probably the first Star Trek show in a long time that felt the most like Trek to me. Like the original. I grew up on the original, as you guys did, and Deep Space Nine and Enterprise, and I watched all of them, even even the bad ones. But I just it really was good. I enjoyed it a lot. I do agree about the characters. I feel like even at the beginning they were able to flesh out these characters. Maybe it's because we already saw Pike and everybody before, and Spock in Discovery, but maybe not. But we also know these characters really well too, those three especially, and I think that was a good way to sort of hook people in and get people interested in the other characters. But they spent a lot of time, I feel like, developing the other characters so they're, like you said, real people, which I appreciated. Yeah, it's I'm loving it. I'm sad that it's going to be gone at all. I wish they'd just roll into another season right now, but
I wish it was an ongoing 52-week season because I haven't enjoyed that. I mean, look, I'm easy to please. People will say to me, how could you like this one particular show or this one particular movie? And my reaction is always the same. When it comes to Star Trek, I mean, I'm not stupid. There are weak episodes. There are horrible episodes. There are a couple of films where I go, why, guys, why? But I can find something to enjoy about it. I'm weird in that my favorite Next Generation film is Insurrection. And most people would call that the worst one, and I think it's fantastic. And I think First Contact has issues, so go figure. But I think that so I've enjoyed everything to come out of the CBS All Access era. I enjoyed Enterprise. These are the shows that are divisive, But I do think that this is the first one where I've just been saying, well, that's not even true because I love Lower Decks. But so Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds are the two standouts for me where just right from the beginning I've been going, God, I love this. Can't wait for another week. And it's great to feel that way about Star Trek again because although I've been watching it my entire life, and although I do enjoy some elements of Picard, and although I did enjoy a couple seasons of Discovery, the truth is that that neither of those shows has had me ecstatic the way Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks and then everything before Enterprise did.
Yeah.
And so it's great to have that feeling again.
Yeah, definitely. I'm like I said, I'm really disappointed that it's not coming back soon, and it's one of the first shows in a while that I can remember like being excited about another episode coming and being able to wait. It's been a while. I mean, like you said, I watched I'll watch anything Star Trek, and I do tend to find things to like for the most part in most things. But yeah, there are a lot of terrible episodes of Trek, and any show really, you can't hit them out of the park every time. But yeah, it's such a great. I don't know. It's hard to put my finger on. I think it's just that. Maybe it hits the nostalgia buttons a little bit. Maybe it does a lot of things. It just feels, and I hate to say this, but because I'm a true fan, as Joe knows, I hate to say this because it feels more like Star Trek to me. I guess because I'm used to the episodic nature of things and like Monster of the Week kind of episodes, and that makes sense to me. But I like the fact that they're keeping maybe two-parters, they're keeping arcs across the season, but it's still about they still have to solve their problems in 46 or 50 minutes or whatever. But anyway, it's just fantastic. I don't know how else to describe it.
It's funny because the big argument, of course, for Discovery and Picard and to a certain extent Enterprise has always been, well, that's not Star Trek, and I'm like, well, it is. It says so right in the title.
Right?
It's Star Trek.
The only people who get to say it is or isn't are the people who own it, not us.
Right. And I'm like, this is made by the people that have the license to make it. So it is Star Trek. And I was like, well, it's not real Trek. And I'm like, well, ask any 10 Star Trek fans what is the best element of Star Trek to them, and you'll get 10 different answers.
Time travel. Oh, sorry.
Right. And, and
I mean, there are people who hate The Next Generation and the original series. I mean, taste, or who think Wrath of Khan's the worst movie. There are people, their tastes really differ. And whenever I hear people saying, this is real or this isn't real, or they use NU to call it New Trek, or I mean, no disrespect to 5 minutes ago, but the phrase true fan.
We joke about
that.
I
figured that was a joke, so that's why I feel comfortable saying it. But all of that to me is just, it flies in the face of what Star Trek is supposed to be about, which is infinite diversity and infinite combinations.
Right.
Like if for people to embrace the ideas behind Star Trek, but have a problem with LGBTQ characters, for people to embrace the ideas behind Star Trek, but to have a problem with a black captain, for people to embrace the ideas behind Star Trek, but to have a problem with a show that has a different style than the ones that came before, or is more emotional, or whatever. To me, that means that these people, they're not fully embracing it. Now, is that elitist on my part? I don't mean it to be, because I think the biggest problem in fandom is elitism. But I do think that there's a place for all of this. And if someone doesn't like something, that's cool. I mean, look, right now we're up to, 12 shows? Yeah. If you don't like 4 of them, you still have 8. Right. So you don't have to watch those 4, right? I mean, there are people who say, I will never watch Star Trek 5 or Insurrection again, and I enjoy them both. But they don't have to watch those. I mean, let's be honest, too. Like, people who say Star Trek's gotten too political, and I'm like, the original series did Vietnam. It did racism. Yeah. This is, this is not. It's always been political. People will say, well, it's got contradictions and it's ignoring canon. James R. Kirk, second pilot. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, there's never been a point where Star Trek hasn't been a narrative mess in terms of contradictions. There's never been a point where Star Trek hasn't been diverse, and there's never been a point where Star Trek hasn't been political. And I kind of question the mindsets of fans who don't get that. No, I'll get off my soapbox and give you guys the conch. I just it's a pet peeve of mine when I hear fandom totally acting like bigoted idiots.
Yeah, this is a subject that comes up with us a lot too. I don't understand it. And I agree with you, and I know Joe does, that people who don't understand that Star Trek has always been political is not just suddenly woke, whatever the hell that means.
Anytime someone uses woke as an insult, I write them off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It's like you don't want me to live in a world where all this stuff is possible. That's ridiculous. Why would I do that? So, it's a point of contention, definitely. But I don't want to be, like you said, I don't want to be an elitist gatekeeper or whatever. If you don't like something, that's cool. Just don't watch it. Like you said, you've got 8 other shows. It's amazing because I've never watched Lower Decks. Spoiler, or shockingly, I've never watched it yet. It's something I have banked that I want to watch. No, I know it is. I'm sure it'll be fantastic.
I hope that you do like it as much. Actually, no, I just started to say what instead I'm going to quote Balak. I hope you relish it as much as I.
There you go.
Because
I just watched that episode the other day. It was funny.
There you go. Yeah. And so now you're probably picturing me as Clint Howard in a robe, which is a pretty funny image.
But with a different voice somehow, though.
Right. Yeah. So I raise my glass of Tranya and say I hope you enjoy the show, because Lower Decks is fun. Give it an episode or 2, because in the beginning they seem to be going full on Orville in their approach, which is a good thing, by the way. Love Orville, but when they find their footing, that show is freaking hilarious, and it's both reverential to Star Trek and a love letter to the Next Generation era, and also a very, very funny parody of Star Trek. It's one of those weird animals like The Princess Bride, which is both a fantastic swashbuckling movie and a fantastic parody of swashbuckling movies,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Or like Young Frankenstein, which is a great Unimon film and a great parody of Unimon films.
Right.
So I think like Lower Decks, not to be too hyperbolic and say it's Young Frankenstein, just that it works both as a Star Trek parody and as a genuine chapter of the franchise, in my opinion.
That's great. Yeah, I would. I'm sure that it will, and I have no doubt. It's just there's so many things to watch as we lament. It's actually a good problem to have. There's just so many great shows that you're trying to get in, like 4 hours of Stranger Things and this and that. It's just so much stuff happening. So,
you guys find that it's crazy that you look around and you say, we're all old enough that we can remember the period where being geeky was something you kept to yourself.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And you look around, it's like everybody watches the MCU. These are based on comic books.
Yeah.
We grew up at a time when you read comic books. Come on, dork. Right now, everybody, right? Comic books are selling because people are going to the movies who would never have read comic books and then are going out and buying graphic novels. And that's a crazy thing to me. The fact that I can't, and that you said you can't keep up because there are 15 different genre-based shows on at the same time. It's overwhelming, but it's amazing that I can't believe that happened. It's just crazy. Like the world just went. Now I get them.
Yeah,
them being us.
Yeah, I can't believe that D&D is so popular either. That just floors me all the time.
Yeah,
that was definitely something you didn't talk about when you were a kid.
I think Stranger Things helped in that regard, but in the meantime, so did Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones. I think those three things really propelled that into the spotlight because people realized, oh, fantasy's cool. Now I get it.
Yeah, it's totally cool. Yeah, I mean, I talk about this sometimes, but this Dungeons and Dragons, I started playing again during the pandemic, actually, online with a bunch of people, and that was very helpful to help your feelings of isolation. And then, of course, restarting the podcast with Joe was super helpful. But yeah, D&D is just it just shocks me how much it's exploded, and also how many quote unquote cool people seem to play now too. It's dudes, Joe, these buff actor types or whatever, just I play D&D, it's super cool. It just shocks me. They've been playing for 25 years. They've been playing since they were kids, and they just never. But
now they're saying it.
Yeah, but now
there's no stigma to their career.
Right. Exactly.
And so you end up with a lot of people in Hollywood who've been watching Trek since the 60s or 70s and kept it to themselves, and now are going, "Please put me on Star Trek. You don't understand. I'm an Uber fan." And so it's pretty wild.
So do we want to, since we talked about Strange New Worlds a little bit, do we want to, Joe, talk about the finale at all? Because I know it's kind of a big deal. It's a good idea.
I think we should go into that. That's huge. And I'm going to say right off the bat that, and I don't mean this in a negative way, and I don't mean this to trash the episode because I dearly loved it, but did Anson Mount play have the look of a motion picture era Kirk down perfectly? I mean, that was my first thought when I saw the older.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Older Pike. I was like, man, he could play Kirk if they remade the Trek movies.
That's wild.
I kind of like him better than the guy they had to play Kirk. Oh, I shouldn't say that. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm not a real fan. I apologize. No, I was just shocked that you and I talked about how we thought the show would do the series or the season finale, not series finale. Don't say that, Chris.
No.
And we did get a few things right. I mean, even right down to that Scottish brogue over the comm.
Yeah.
I was like, there's Scotty, man. I'm just telling you.
By the way, I loved that played while Spock was in the Jeffries tube. That was perfect.
Yes.
I really felt like I was watching the original series in that moment.
Definitely.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I could totally picture. I was sitting there, I'm picturing Nimoy in the Jeffries tube and doing off camera saying, Mr. Scott, I can do it for you in a minute. I'm just making up that line. That's obviously not a line of dialogue, but I mean,
sure.
And it's also a pretty crappy Scotty voice. But that to me was so original series, and I loved it. I know I've seen people saying they had a problem with the episode, and that's cool, but I absolutely loved it. Seeing the monster maroon just made me giggle. That was one thing I did not predict, because like you, I predicted some of the things would happen, and they did. Did not expect the monster maroon. That was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was just a beautiful episode, and it's very interesting because I see everybody now. Of course, people are dissecting it and poring over it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it proves that." The universe can't exist without Kirk, and it proves that Kirk is a better captain than Spike, and than Pike, and I'm like, no,
Captain Spike, I like it.
Yeah, Captain Spike, yeah.
The vampire captain.
He is immortal, so...
Right.
But I'm like, no, I think you missed the point. The point is that he showed us that Spock is the most crucial character in Star Trek. And if you follow his whole trajectory from the original series, including Enterprise Incident, and going through the movies, and the new movies, and Next Generation, it's like... wow, yeah, if he was pulled off the board that early, everything falls apart. So
I think you're right, because I think one of the things the episode showed is that he made both Kirk and Pike better captains.
Right.
And so that's the common thread. By the way, one of the things I really loved about this was that it sets up the menagerie brilliantly.
Yes.
The whole idea that Pike realizes Spock's importance and is willing to sacrifice himself for Spock. And Spock, not quite getting it, but sensing this, does exactly the same thing for him. It is a great bookend. And it explains why Spock is willing to toss his career away in the menagerie for a man who was willing to go through everything he went through for him. And knowingly did this. I think it's great. I wondered when we watched Discovery why they had Pike see his future. It seemed like I thought it was a beautiful episode, but it seemed an odd storytelling choice, and I wondered how that was going to pay off, where they were going with that. And now that we're there, I say, okay, that was a great storytelling choice because it set up explaining the menagerie, and I thought it worked really, really well.
Yeah, exactly.
We had that conversation a couple episodes ago. We were wondering, how does Spock get to that point? And then this, I agree with you. I was watching the episode going, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. They definitely explain why. Because a few years later, he's willing to sacrifice everything for Pike. And we don't really get that. We don't get the feeling of that relationship, I don't think, in the menagerie at all, really. I mean, obviously they were loyal to each other, but you didn't quite understand the depth of Spock's feelings towards Pike. But in this, you absolutely do. It's really well done. Obviously, they've watched a few episodes before to understand this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I also love the fact that it was an homage to one of my favorite episodes.
Yes.
Right down to the I was actually quoting along with the dialogue as they were speaking. It's like,
as was I.
It was hard not to. So
I also got a kick out of the fact that immediately I said, that's Tomlinson and Marty. I was like, oh, that's great. I know this wedding, I know what this is going to be. The moment I saw the room. Yep.
Yes. Well, even right down to the music with the reveal of the Romulan commander. They did the music from the original episode. It was
There's
it was
one thing I would have done differently, though.
Oh.
And it has to do with casting. I want to see if you guys can figure out what it is. They missed a great opportunity for an in-joke.
Oh, they should have had James Frayne play the Romulan commander.
should have played the Romulan commander,
Yeah.
And that would have been great. And don't get me wrong, I thought this guy was fine, but a friend of mine, wait, was it you, Joe? No, it wasn't you. Was it about Galaxy Quest?
No.
Someone had said that the problem they had was that the first thing they thought when they saw him was that they pictured the Thermians from Galaxy Quest.
Yeah.
And as soon as they said that to me, I'm like, damn it, you're right. Now I can't unsee that,
Here's the thing, though. Yeah. Back when the original series aired, TV shows in the 60s, obviously, as we've all discussed many times, you saw an episode when it aired, and you maybe got a repeat over the summer and then never saw it again. So you had like this stable, much like the British do, you had this stable of background actors that guest starred on episodes.
And people probably didn't realize it was the same guy.
Yeah, multiple episodes and stuff like that. Today, if you'd had James Frayne play the Romulan commander, there would have been like these explosion of, blog posts and videos of like, how do we explain this? How is it possible? And all, it would be like, just relax.
But see, that would have been the brilliance of it. The brilliance of it would have been not explaining it.
Yes, it would have been a great joke.
But they could have flipped it and made it Denise Crosby or something too.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
The other thing I wish, they missed a great opportunity to finally give that guy a name. Why did they not say his name? There is a name in the novels and comics, which is Karras, which is Sarek backwards, which I think is hilarious.
That is funny.
If they had called him Commander Karras and just finally given the guy a damn name, I would have been very happy. Weirdly enough, they didn't even give Decius his name. I thought, or Tomlinson and Martine. I thought that was. I was surprised. If you're going to do the episode so obviously that everybody knows what you're doing, really embrace it. Hell, make the Praetor the commander from the Enterprise incident by having her mention a new cloaking device that she's building. Like, really embrace this. But look, that's not even a quibble because I loved it. I thought it was great, and there were very few things I would have changed about it. Honestly, I thought it was a great summary to the season. And here's the other thing. I think it did what Into Darkness utterly failed to do. And there are aspects of Into Darkness I enjoy, and they're all in the first half.
Yeah, yes.
But I actually think this is an aside, I think the first half of Into Darkness is brilliant.
Yes, me too.
I think as a story about terrorism and about exploitation, it is great. And the moment that he says, "My name is Khan," is the point where the whole thing falls apart, because from that point on, it is an inferior replay of The Wrath of Khan, and a nonsensical one, since he's a pasty-faced white person, and it doesn't make any sense. Nor should the phrase "my name is Khan" mean anything to anyone but the audience. So, like, the line doesn't even make sense, right?
Right.
But putting that aside, I think the finale to Strange New Worlds succeeded where Into Darkness failed, because what they did was take a very beloved story and retell it in another universe and do it really well. And that's something that I wish Into Darkness had pulled off, or not even tried.
Well, and they, even right down to having Ortegas be the Styles character this time around. I was a little disturbed by that. Like, I know.
Is there a bigotry in her we're going to see play out? I don't know. I do know that one of the things, if I recall correctly, about the Cage was that Jose Tyler's original name was Ortega, and he was said to be fiery. And so the moment that her name was first revealed and before the show came out, I thought, all right, so this is how they're getting around the Jose Tyler problem because of Ash Tyler. I was like, are they going to like have Jose Tyler and have them be related? That's strange. But instead, they went with Tyler's earlier name, which I thought was kind of fun. And she is kind of fiery, apparently. So that so we'll see if that how that plays out. That might have been a hint of what's to come.
Could be. I mean, I kind of got the impression that she wasn't necessarily bigoted, but that had some kind of, much like La'an, had previous experience with Romulans, and so it was like, they can't be trusted. We got to destroy them. So
that's what I thought too. But also, it could be just that she has some hidden prejudice. I mean, we haven't really seen an Ortega's backstory episode still, so maybe this was kind of a sort of de facto one of those. But because a lot of the other characters have gotten more development, she hasn't really gotten as much. But I feel like she's always been kind of if not confrontational or bigoted, but definitely feisty. She definitely, even in the first episode, she's making fun of Uhura. She's doing all kinds of stuff. So she's very opinionated. It's not a stretch to say that. I don't think they're going to make her like wearing a MAGA hat or something, but I think that she's definitely got opinions.
That's funny.
There's nothing wrong with that, because
she would have a Muska hat, make Starfleet great again.
There you go.
Yeah,
that's not available at our merch store, everybody. Sorry.
No.
Maybe it should be. So, so where do you think Rich? Where do you think the season's going to go? Where are we going to go next year? You think?
Probably to space. I'm sorry, that was a really
final frontier.
Really stupid joke. I'm sorry.
Probably be on a ship.
I'm ashamed of myself. Right. Okay, so I mean, the final scene of the episode gives us a very clear indicator of at least one plot, which is going to be Una.
Yeah.
I was not surprised. I saw some people saying they wish that had not been in the episode. The only thing I could say to that is it would have been kind of cooler to put it in like a mid-credit scene, because it's not related to the rest of the story, so it would have been cool to have everything end on a great note and then mid-credit scene have that happen. But other than that, I'm glad they included it. I thought it was a tantalizing glimpse of what's to come. I think it's going to connect to La'an's character as well, because she is the descendant of genetic breeding, and Una is the product of genetic breeding. And even in the 24th century, we saw with Bashir that the prejudice still persists. So I have a feeling that these two are going to emerge more in the spotlight in season 2 than they were in season 1. You know, when the show was first announced, I always say her name wrong. She was the one I was the most nervous about in terms of not being able to embrace it. Because I think that, look, Ricardo Montalban's great. He really is. But I think those 2 appearances he did probably should have been the end of it. I think that Khan's been overplayed. And so I thought the idea of having Noonien Singh, listen to me. The idea of having a Noonien Singh on the Enterprise, just half dozen years before Kirk meets Khan, and Spock doesn't even mention it, I thought, how could this possibly work? But I've actually warmed up to her character, and I think that her story is going to dovetail with Una. I don't know how you guys think about that, but I think that we're going to see something. There's got to be a reason that they have a condescending and an Illyrian.
Yeah.
Yes, there's got to be a connection there, right?
Well, they haven't gone. They mentioned it and they talk about it a little bit, but they don't really haven't gone back to it. So I think you're absolutely right. It's going to definitely play in season 2. But yeah, that's a great point too. Is that Spock never mentions it during Space Seed? Oh, by the way, Captain. There was this other incident that happened.
Well, he didn't mention siblings either, so
Well, that's personal though. This is like mission critical kind of stuff.
I wrote an article for Hero Collector all about the fact that Spock is the most secret keeper in the history of secret keepers. Like he didn't tell anybody Kirk was surprised to find out Sarek and Amaranda were his parents. He didn't tell them he was the son of royalty. They didn't know T'Pau was part of the family. They didn't know about T'Pring. They didn't know about Sybok. They didn't know about Michael. They didn't know about Ponfar. He didn't tell them about V'ger right away.
Yeah.
He didn't. He stole the Enterprise and the Menagerie. Like, this is a guy who does not tell anybody anything. Right. So I get it, but there are 2 things there are 2 things about this season that made me go, really? And one of them was Spock not mentioning Khan. And the other one was the fact that now Pike, for the next 7 years, isn't going to tell anybody that the Romulans are Vulcans. Now, I guess in that case, he's trying not to save history, so I can buy that one.
Well, now you've hit on my big problem with the episode, and it's I have this with all these kind of episodes. So you're saying that Pike has to get disfigured and all this kind of stuff so that Kirk can take over the Enterprise and he and Spock can do things the way they're meant to be. Well, you've now given him 7 years to figure out how to get out of that. So literally all he has to do is he can still save the recruits. He can still save himself. And as they mentioned, it happened 6 months before that, right after that incident, go, you know what? This shook me enough. I'm going to step down. Right? I mean, it's like, you've given him 7 years to figure out the problem, and he's probably, all he has to do is tell Spock, and it's like, hey, what do we do to get out of this in 7 years? All right, well, I mean, they're pretty good at figuring out something in 45 minutes. They could figure out something in 7 years.
You think, yeah.
But again, that's not the story. So I'm just like, well, you have to put that aside, but it's like, oh, come on.
Well, that's what we talked about. Is like trying to maintain canon or continuity from the show. The show itself, or the series of shows, have never really done a super particularly great job about that. So the fact that some of this is sort of loose, but like it was originally, they were talking about this show in the first place, it's going to be loose canon, right? It's like be sort of tangentially related. It's a reboot, retelling of the Star Trek mythos, or whatever you want to call it. Which I like the fact that they're leading into what I've always suspected is they're going to do a new reboot of the original series with Kirk and everybody.
I hope so.
But the question that Joe and I have sometimes is maybe are they relying too much on these legacy characters in this show? Because I like Pike. I think Pike is a great character, and all these sort of new characters I totally enjoy. So I'm worried a little bit that they sometimes will rely on the fact that we heard Scotty is great, but now we're going to be thinking about Scotty and Kirk during the interim maybe, and not Pike necessarily. So you think that's a problem for the show, Rich?
I think it's a valid concern. If every 3 episodes they bring in someone new, then I'll start to worry about it. Right now, I'm giddy with the fact that we have a TV series starring Dr. Mbenga. I would never.
Yeah.
There you go.
Right, that's just, if you had said to me, pick 212 scenarios that could possibly be Star Trek shows, and then pick 608 more, a series starring Chapel and Mbenga would not have been among those 800 plus concepts, because it would never have occurred to me that they would even think of doing something like that. Now, I'm not, those two characters work really well on some levels, not as well on others. But the fact that they're willing to do stuff like that, to me, is really cool. And the guy who did Scotty's voice sounds just like him, so that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
What I don't want to see is next week we bring Sulu in, and then the next week after that we see, like, a 16-year-old Chekhov going, "I want to go to the academy." Like, I don't want to see that. I think that would become far too reliant really fast. And then the week after that we meet Picard's great grandmother. Like, I don't want to see that. I think if they're doing that too much, it'll be an issue. But for me, I don't think we're at that point yet. I think bringing Kirk in was kind of cool because it does set up why he succeeds him as captain. And they do stretch the canon a little bit, but I look, like, just as with the terms awesome and iconic, canon is another term I think has been overused.
Sure. Absolutely.
I think people will argue canon to death, and I want to stick them in a cannon. And I just, like, to me, like, it doesn't. What matters to me is, am I enjoying this? It's been my argument about the comics, which is my biggest area of passion since the beginning. In my head canon, DC Comics Star Trek run happened between the movies. It doesn't matter to me what Paramount says. They did, because I enjoy them, and that's what matters. So for me, if there are things that end up getting stretched on this show, I'm cool with it. If there are things that just don't make sense, I'm less cool with it. I'm going to be honest with you and tell you there was one episode this season I hated. Okay, hated is overplaying it.
Yeah.
That's hyperbolic. But one episode that I just thought, oh, that was a mistake, and that's the Gorn episode. I thought it was really bad because it was just a rip-off of Alien versus Predator. And it just didn't. I cannot reconcile in my head how these chest-bursting, bloodthirsty, really fast-moving, crazed monsters become the slow-moving, calculating, space-faring, sentient civilization. And I cannot reconcile how these things that run around eating anything actually and need, like hosts from other species, end up xenophobic and not bothering anyone until they're invaded. It just seems like
Different species.
I guess that's possible. Yeah, I mean, that would explain why the different species thing I can glom onto, because it explains Kirk's line. The Metron said this is a Gorn. Is if he was expecting one of the the chest bursters, and he sees this giant lizard and goes, "Gorn, what?" But to me, like, when you have to do that in order to make it fit, that means you didn't do it right.
Different species, and who's to say that the two encounters that we've had with them weren't invasions on their territory unknowingly? So there you go.
I can buy it. I can buy, like, Joe. You know that from part of my background involves that I did some writing for West End games and other things for the Star Wars universe. And one of the things I had a lot of fun doing, it was limited, but I did some. And one of the things I liked doing a lot was fixing plot holes. And my friend Abel Pena and I had a lot of fun with this. We would, like, if we saw an opportunity to throw one line in that would explain something that didn't make sense, we would, and people would be like, "Oh, cool, that makes sense now." So I fully embrace what you're saying, because if there's a way to make them fit, I'm all for it. I'd love to redeem that episode in my head. What
and
you're
maybe
saying
they
makes
will,
sense.
Especially since I think it sounds like the Gorn are going to be kind of an ongoing, as I said, their version of the Borg, and Chris said that too. That
you said it first, though. It's okay.
That we'll get there. I bet they'll explain it. So,
well,
I hope
it
so.
could be that they're just the baby version, and then as they grow older and get bigger, they slow down, or they whatever. But yeah, I mean,
can you imagine then what a Gorn nursery is like?
Yeah,
with these older Gorns going, I hate the youngsters.
Yeah.
Why must they do this?
They block it off and walk away because it's like, now they're going to kill us. That's
These
crazy.
damn kids.
Stupid kids.
Well, it's hard to know which one I love more, whether it was the Gorn from that episode or the Slee Stack. It was a difficult choice, but
Yes.
they were also terrific too.
They were related, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
In some way, they were related. Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a time. Land of the Lost was like time travel, I believe,
Yeah.
in that series. So it's like it's totally possible that the Gorn
And
the
Chaka
Slee
the
Stack
Paka was a Wookiee. It's all connected.
Hey, it's all connected, man. Yeah. So yeah, we haven't even talked about Star Wars at all, but that's another thing. But do you? I guess I could ask the $100,000 question. Which one is Star Trek or Star Wars? Do you think?
A little more specific on the question. Are you asking which I think is better?
Which one do you like more? I guess is the question.
one?
Yeah.
I am far more a Star Trek fan.
Yeah. Okay.
I partly because I had seen it first. I mean, Star Wars didn't exist when I was watching the reruns, so that's also because I think there's a lot. I mean, man, I'm going to skewer myself here because people who know my work from Star Wars are going to say I betrayed them. It's going to be the Kevin Anderson burger flipping thing all over again.
Man.
But Star Wars to me it's incredibly enjoyable at times. It's a lot of fun, but it's a far more inconsistent quality-wise universe. There, I said it. And it's also a lot less deep. To be honest, there's so much more substance to Star Trek. Now, it's apples and oranges. That's not a smackdown on Star Wars. Star Wars doesn't need to be this incredibly political, incredibly soul-searching thing that Star Trek sometimes is. And Star Wars is basically good versus evil. Star Wars is The Wizard of Oz. Star Wars is Heart of Darkness. It is Buck Rogers. It is very specifically meant to be homages to other things. Whereas, I mean, Star Trek is too because it's Forbidden Planet. But you know what I mean. Like it's a very the intention with Star Wars is very different than it is with Star Trek, and I think Star Trek resonates with me more because the idea of getting to know flawed. The phrase "the human adventure is just beginning." There's a reason that phrase matters to Star Trek because in the end, it is a human adventure. Despite the fact that people have head bumps or they can change shape or they're actually got a positronic brain, it's a human adventure.
Yeah.
Star Wars is largely about space monks with laser swords.
Yes.
And it's fun, but let's be honest. I mean, Ian McDiarmid is the most thrilling actor ever to play a villain. I adore the guy. Palpatine is a cackling idiot, right? I will watch Ian McDiarmid play Palpatine for 100 hours straight.
Yeah.
But Palpatine is the most one-dimensional villain ever created.
Well, he's twirling a mustache, basically. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And I mean, it's hilarious that he purposely lets his face turn into a giant prune just to take over the galaxy. But that's so one-dimensional in terms of evil, right?
Yeah.
And so it's apples and oranges for me. I much prefer the villains of Star Trek because they're formidable, but they're also intelligent and not seriously one-dimensional.
Yeah. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that Star Trek was a series, too, so we got a chance to
There's that,
explore
too.
these characters over a long period of time. And Star Wars, as much as I love Star Wars, and I do, I have to agree. I think that definitely Star Trek is more nuanced and more deep.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a good word for it. Star Wars is all surface for the most part. It has to be. Now they're trying to sort of expand it with series and whatever. But with Star Trek, you got 79 episodes to get to know these people, and you got another series, and you get to know them all really, really well. Whereas Star Wars, you got 90 minutes to bang something out, and they're more stereotypes or archetypes, I suppose.
I will say that Clone Wars did it with Ahsoka Tano. Ahsoka Tano for me is the best thing to come out of the modern era of Star Wars.
Well, that's a series.
And
that makes sense.
I hated her the first season. Hated her. All that Sky Guy and Snip stuff. I actually wanted to reach through the screen and erase the character with a pencil eraser. And then something happened, and she became my favorite Star Wars character. Okay. And it's because finally this was a character with some serious depth. Yeah. There was gravitas to her storytelling, and that's something I think sometimes is missing with Star Wars.
Yeah. Here's a little fun fact for you guys. In my day job, when I interview people for jobs, I ask at the end of the interview, my last question is Star Wars or Star Trek? And
That's brilliant.
And there's a very good reason why I do that, because I'm in the technical field, IT. If people that tend to love Star Trek tend to be very analytical, very technically detailed, and very linear. And people that love Star Wars tend to be, more think out the box, be creative, and things like that. And the best of both worlds is if they're like, well, I love both equally. I can't choose one or the other.
Yeah.
Occasionally, I'll get someone to go, oh, I don't really care for either. I like Stargate. I actually got that with someone I interviewed. Or I like
Doctor
this
Who.
other franchise, Doctor Who. So it's
Good times.
It's a good,
There you go. Good callback.
yeah, it kind of throws them off a little bit, but it's also gives me an idea of how they think and what type of person they are. So there you go.
If your hiring practices are in any way influenced by the answer, don't admit it on the air.
I will not admit that.
I will never hire a Star Wars fan.
Never.
I mean,
No.
yeah.
It's like saying I'll never hire a woman. No, wait, no. Sorry.
Here's the thing, though. I feel that the larger premise to this is, if I were to expand what I said before about fans who sometimes fail to grasp the diversity of Star Trek's message, I think it includes all of science fiction. I think that, it's cool to debate and fun to think about the differences between them, but I think there's room for Star Wars and Star Trek and Stargate and anything else with the word star in it.
Yep.
I've used this one phrase in my several different intros because I'm somebody who likes to repeat myself. The 4 stars of science fiction, which is Star Trek, Star Wars, Stargate, and Battlestar Galactica. and what I mean by that is that there's no one thing that I think stands out as an indication of what science fiction should be. There are some that really stand out more, but like there's a whole sky up there of different stars, and every one of them is bright. If people are really into Red Dwarf, first of all, I love them. Second of all, but if they, because they're my people. But if they hate Planet of the Apes and they love Red Dwarf, that's still cool to me. Because there's so many different franchises a person could embrace.
Yeah.
It's so weird. It's weird to me because I grew up. I'm like, well, I love science fiction. I love fantasy. I love really good storytelling. Those are the things that I'm, I guess, a fan of and enjoy. And it wasn't until I started going to, actually, probably not even the first couple of years I went to Comic-Con, but it seemed like in the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, I started getting asked the question, oh, you're at this con, which fandom do you belong to? And I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, which fandom? Star Trek or something? I'm like, I like it all. Why is there? I didn't understand the whole fandom thing being like siloed.
Well, I got to put you in a box, man.
I'm like, what? That's
I've run into
weird
that
to me.
too.
The correct answer is always Yu-Gi-Oh, right?
Yeah. Yes. Pokemon. Yeah.
Pokemon. Yeah, there you go.
I'm here for the Sailor Moon.
Yeah, so I never really
yeah.
kind of understood that siloing. I'm like, I'm a fan of all of this here. That's why
I've run into that
badge.
too. I've never quite understood it. When I see people getting upset, genuinely upset, not just fake upset. I don't understand it. I can remember the early days of. I'm sure you guys will remember this too. The early days of the internet, the bulletin board days, and the AOL online days, and one of the biggest, most nonsensical but never-ending debates was Enterprise versus Star Destroyer.
Right.
And
Of course.
why? I mean, it's a fun thought exercise. And there are people who will immediately say Enterprise, and there were people who immediately say Star Destroyer. And for those going, what are you talking about? It was which one would destroy the other one.
Right.
But it in the end, some people would just get so angry about it and so personal. It's like, wait, so you're saying that I'm an asshole or a jerk or stupid because I think one fictional laser-powered vessel could destroy the other fictional laser-powered vessel. That makes no sense. Why is this a personal thing? And so I tended to stay away from that debate entirely. I never understood that aspect of fandom. I don't get it. And I'm as avid as you can get, and I will never say another fandom is bad. I will never say people who like another fandom are stupid. I don't understand that mindset. I really don't.
My answer to that is whoever's writing the story. That's what
Right.
whatever they decide. I loved speaking of canon and details and continuity and stuff. One of the best answers I've ever heard to how fast a starship goes was asked of J. Michael Straczynski.
Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about.
They asked how fast do the Star Furies go, and he said the speed of plot.
Right.
Because they're like, well, how long does it take to get from planet A to planet B? He's like, what? It takes as long as whatever scene I need to have that happens between those. That's it. That's like, warp factor. People are like, there's no way they got from such and such to Vulcan in that amount of time at that warp. And I'm like, sure they did. That's what the story dictated.
How could Voyager get back in the Delta Quadrant that fast?
Right. I mean, it's not documentaries. And I know that's a shock to some people, but, that was one of the...
It's certainly a shock to the Thermians.
Yeah.
Yes.
But if that's how you want to express your fandom, as long as you're not a jerk about it, I feel like if people want to get into that level of detail, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as you're not an asshole, just don't be an asshole. I think it's a really good sort of mantra to go by. Like Will Wheaton always says, "Don't be a dick." Right? It's like don't be a dick about it.
Wheaton's first law.
If you think that,
look,
if you
be
think
as
that
avid as you want. Yeah.
If you think your Star Destroyer is better than the Enterprise, then you're wrong. But okay.
But I think that's it. Wheaton is a wise man, and don't be a dick is the best way to look at fandom. Years ago, I worked on a series of books for Boom Studios, reprinting Planet of the Apes Marvel run, and what I did was I wrote some in-depth essays for each volume. Talking about the history of the stories contained in that volume, its historical relevance, and so forth. And keep in mind, we're talking about a franchise that is about nuclear paranoia and man's inhumanity to man, and man's inhumanity to animals, and religious dogmatism versus science, and one of the movies being a parallel to the civil rights movement. This is heady stuff, right? Yeah. And this is stuff that is very political. And in my essay, I discussed Doug Mensch's Terror on the Planet of the Apes, which features apes on horseback wearing white hoods running around burning down human villages. And I pointed out very obviously that these were a parallel to the Ku Klux Klan. And I actually, keep in mind that the only people who would have ever read these books, because these are hardcover, expensive books, reprinting Planet of the Apes comics. So nobody would have ever read this without being a diehard Planet of the Apes fan. And to me, this is the crazy part, what happened. So a diehard Planet of the Apes fan, a diehard fan of a franchise that is very left-wing and speaks out against religious dogmatism and so forth, and oppression and far-right ideals, started harassing me because I dared to complain. I dared to basically put these Apes comics frame it in a setting of it being a statement, and the whole franchise as a whole being a statement against far right ideals. He was really upset that I compared this to the Ku Klux Klan, and started really harassing me for being liberal, and tried to get me fired at like 10 different publishers, some of which I wasn't. Wow. I wasn't even writing for at the time. Like, he just sent these things to everybody. And I thought to myself, by the way, the side note is he did no damage whatsoever. I kept writing for the ones I was writing for.
That's good.
Because they recognized he was crazy. But what struck me as bizarre is that franchises will attract people that the franchises are actually actively speaking out against.
Right.
Yes. Right? That just doesn't make sense to me. If you are somebody who sympathizes with Nazis and you like Star Trek, you're kind of an imbecile.
Maybe we are the bad guys. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, right. So I I don't understand fandom. I will never understand, no matter how long I live, I will never understand people.
Because that's the real point. Yeah, people are strange, definitely.
Well, and Star Trek was a hard sell early on because it was too cerebral, and that tends to be some of the arguments that people are having, not only to Discovery, but even Strange New Worlds. Are like, oh, there's too much talk and too much, emotion and figuring things out. I want more pew 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 and more phasers and stuff. And it's like,
and you wonder if they saw the cage,
right?
Yeah. Like this is so great as a follow-up to The Cage because it's just like The Cage. Yeah. I mean, yes, minus the sexism. Take the sexism out.
Yes.
But I mean, in terms of it being a very cerebral story involving characters with problems that they're trying to overcome, in terms of it being a team of people who care about each other and work together, in terms of the villains not necessarily being villainous because what they're doing is bad, but there's another side to the story. I mean, this is Strange New Worlds is such a worthy successor to The Cage because The Cage was good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so to complain about Strange New Worlds being whatever you think it is means it means you weren't paying attention to what came before, because the Cage and the original series and even the animated series were just like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or you're probably just looking for something to argue about. I feel like sometimes people like that are just, maybe they're lonely or maybe they're just angry in general and they're looking for something to get online and fight about. But also I think people sometimes, maybe not even sometimes, tend to take ownership of these things. Like you talk about my show. It's my show. It's not, this is not right. This is not how it's supposed to be. This is not how, and Joe is fond of saying, well, just make your own show then. It's just like, if you don't like how this is, just go ahead and make your own and see how it goes. But this is how it's been written. And the whole idea that Straczynski said, and also just other people, and we've talked about this before too, it's like they do the thing in the script because that's the thing when the script tells them to do it. It's like at some point it's a story and you have to get from point A to point B. And sometimes that means you have to fudge the amount of light speed you can do and the warp factor and hyperspace. And, you can slingshot around the sun several times and then not talk about it again and all kinds of shit. So
who knew that Shatner's Saturday Night Live sketch would be so relevant today?
I know.
Seriously.
It's exactly fandom today. It's like, well, in episode blah, 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 you opened the safe. What was the combination? He's like, I don't know. It was a show I did 10 years ago, and I just did what was said in the script. I mean,
the truth is, it's always been fandom. I mean, I remember when The Next Generation was first announced, and people were in an uproar. Actually, funny story, bringing it back to the beginning of the conversation. You asked what got me into this, and I said my mom. My mom and I have had a running... Well, my mom actually died a couple of years ago, but before that, we'd had a running in-joke going back to 1987, which is, that's not Star Trek. So it's relevant to this. And the reason is this, because when The Next Generation first debuted, my mom, who was such a fan of the original series, she even loved the animated series, she watched the movies, and she watched The Next Generation, and she watched the pilot, and I was in college, and I called her and said, what do you think? And she said, well, I like parts of it, but it's just not Star Trek. And I said, oh, well, keep watching. Maybe you'll feel differently. And this went on for the full season. Every week, that was really good, or that was not really good. It's just not Star Trek. And then there came to a point where she was kind of chuckling as she said it, because she knew that I realized she fully believed this was Star Trek. It's just that now she had said it 15 times, right? And she was watching it for the 16th time. And so it became a running joke throughout the next several decades. So, like, here we would be watching Discovery, and she'd be like, yeah, it's just not Star Trek. And we'd both laugh, right? Because we're like, no, you're loving it as much as I am. And, that was a running joke. But what she would say with amusement and irony, there are others who truly believe, and I don't get that. I don't get it, because it implies that Star Trek is supposed to be in a funnel. Right. That everything everywhere should line up. Meanwhile, these same people adored The Next Generation, which acted like there were no androids out there, and Deep Space Nine, which acted like there were no shapeshifters out there. Right. Which is really funny, because it wasn't even just the original series, that had shapeshifters. Like, shapeshifters are everywhere. There are entire planets of them. There are shapeshifters in the original series and the animated series and the movies. And then The Next Generation acts like, I mean, the Deep Space Nine acts like, Odo can never find any.
Right.
We've got
Right.
so we come up with the idea that they're changelings. He's different than all the others because that's the headcanon way of explaining
Right.
why he didn't track down the Elasmorphs or any of the others that are out there. And Data's a Sung type android. Because
Right,
there's an
there's
entire
no other-
planet of them out there,
Right.
Yeah.
but they're not Sung type. And if you can accept that if you can accept Data and Odo as being unique in a universe in which they are very much not unique, then the stuff that's done now should not be that big an issue to accept.
Yeah.
Star Trek's in the title. It's right there.
Exactly.
It's Star Trek.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
I feel like we could do this for hours, but I know that we don't have unlimited amount of time. So I do want to talk about your book, the one that just came out. So would you like to plug your book now? Go ahead.
I'm assuming you mean the Stargate one.
Yes.
Joe, why don't you? You're actually connected to this. I'm doing more talking than you are. So
I weirdly have not talked about it on the podcast, but
Go ahead.
But yeah, as Rich said, I've been contributing to. Thankfully, Rich, for whatever reason that he hopefully doesn't regret, a while ago asked me to write some stuff for some couple Planet of the Apes books, and God bless his soul, as they say. He kept coming back to me, maybe because he
your
couldn't get
checks
anyone
never
else to write.
bounce. So.
Well, that's true. Yeah, that's
nice.
true. Maybe he couldn't get anyone else to write, but
Right, exactly.
but yeah, of course, over time, it was like, I have some ideas for a book. One of them was Stargate, and as he said, he thankfully agreed to co-edit it with me, and we pitched it, and then, of course, it was refused. And then for whatever reason during the pandemic, they came back and said, "Hey, how'd you like to do that book?" And we did, and had a great time. I mean, again, Stargate is one of those franchises that I dearly love, not from the beginning, but grew to love mainly because of the characters and the storylines, and kind of it's a little bit of a reverence that it has. It almost. There are many times on Stargate, especially SG-1, where you almost expect the characters to look and wink at the camera, right?
Yeah.
And it's a fantastic franchise, and I really loved writing for it and finding out some different aspects. We have a great stable of writers that wrote for it that brought out aspects and parts of the franchise I never even previously considered. And they were it's a wonderful, I say this every one of these books that I even just contribute to, and I'm like, I'm really proud of what I wrote for it, and I'm really proud of the book. And that's true every single time. And this one probably more so because, I co-edited it with Rich, and it was an interesting, often joyful experience. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that happens with any book that it makes you wonder, is this thing actually going to get done or ever come out?
Sure.
But once
I get that reference, to quote Captain America.
once you're on the other side of it, really, and you have a completed book, it's all worth it. And it was amazing. And I have to say that I know in previous things I've worked with Rich, but also other things, that it's not always easy to get, especially if you're going for 14, 15 essays, to get outstanding ones every time. And I feel like we lucked out on this. Every time one was submitted, it was like, there's very little needs to be done with this. It's amazing.
We got some really, really good work on this. And
Yeah.
by the way, neither one of us has said the title, I just realized. It's unauthorized off-world activation exploring the Stargate franchise. We should probably mention that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's
that's good.
from Sequart. And if you don't mind my saying, I should give credit to the writers that Joe has just mentioned. So it's edited by me and Joe. There was an introduction by Alexis Cruz, who, of course, plays Skara in the original movie and on SG-1, and that's just the coolest thing. And then there's a cover by Leia Battle, who has now done three. Yes, it's beautiful. She's done three Sequart covers for me on various books, and one this book with Joe, and then two others that I did with Lou Tambone, and they're all brilliant, and they are great because they totally evoke the franchises that they're supposed to evoke without being copyright infringing.
Yes,
which is not an easy line to walk.
That's good.
And the essayists, in addition to me and Joe, Ren Cummins, Keith DeCandido, Edward Dodds, Joe Duffy. And that's Joe Duffy from the Marvel Star Wars run, which was a really cool thrill. Brianna Elkins, Kelly Fitzpatrick, Mark Haynes, Brendan Jerwa, Robert Jashonik, Anastasia Clement. I'm sorry, Anastasia, I just said your name wrong. Klimchinskaya, Val Nolan, Frank Schildiner, and Darren Sumner from Gate World. And we had a couple of really fortuitous accidents happen. One was that we had an essayist who at the last moment had to drop out, and the essay that was going to be written we felt was integral to the book, and we were like, no. And Brianna walked in and wrote it incredibly fast and wrote exactly what the book needed. That was one of them.
Yes.
Val Nolan had written an academic paper and found out about the book basically after we were done, and said, "Here, do you want this?" And we read it and went, "Oh, yes. Oh yes, we do." and there might have been others, but like those two really stood out to me. That we weren't planning those two essays, and they ended up really being standouts, which was fun.
That's great.
And there's a great in-joke in Joe Duffy's. I'm going to totally make myself look like a fool on purpose here.
Yes.
So Joe is a friend of mine going back years, and I always wanted to work with her. And so I only stress that not to sound like a name dropper, but simply because it explains why this joke even happened. So she was writing. She's known. Her Marvel run is known because of a lot of the use of the Ewoks and so forth, that's her how she rolls. She wanted to write about the Furlings, which in Stargate are we've never met them except once possibly, and it seems like they're giant Ewoks, and so of course she was going to write this. And in an email, a string of emails between the three of us, I don't know if I just hadn't slept in 3 days, if I hadn't eaten my Wheaties. I don't know what it was, but somehow I totally misinterpreted that Joe, who had almost finished her essay, had written Furling fan fiction. And I went into panic mode because I knew Sequart would never allow that. It would get the book shut down. And I made the really stupid mistake of asking her, "Oh no, you didn't write Furling fanfic, did you?" And she never let me forget it. She thought it was hilarious, and she just kept ribbing me. And it was funny because once I looked back, I'm like, no, that was monumentally a stupid thing to assume. This is a career veteran writer who knows better than to suddenly think I was asking for fanfic when I clearly wasn't when I approached her. Like what? I don't know. Brain fart, I don't know, but she actually referenced it in the essay, and I thought you deserve that, and I left it in there.
Yes, nice. Absolutely. Yes,
that's awesome.
Yeah, so the book has humor, is where I'm going with this.
Good.
And,
yes. Well, humor's
so
important.
it was a mixture of some really. Stargate's one of those franchises where sometimes it's very winky humory and not as deep. Other times it can be deep, but it's a franchise with so many different types of stories. And the great thing is that the writers really embrace that. There are some very serious essays, some pretty humorous ones. I discussed the Stargate cartoon, and there was no way you can do that without being humorous.
Yeah, and I still thank you for your service on that, because that was no one should be subjected to that series.
The Stargate cartoon. That's not.
I'm kind of weird
bad.
in that regard. So Stargate cartoon might be. I mean, I want to say it's the worst thing that ever existed, but that would be hyperbolic. But it would come close. But I'm kind of weird like that because for the Planet of the Apes books from Sequart, I covered the Burton film and the Planet of the Apes cartoon, just because I knew nobody else would take them each time. And the same thing happened with the Stargate cartoon. So I decided to have fun with it.
Yeah, why not? So where can people find the book? At the usual places like Amazon and all that, or?
It's on Amazon, or they can just simply go to Stargate. I'm sorry, Stargate.com.
Nope.
Yeah, we're not that official.
Not yet.
No.
I meant to say sequart.org, or if they go to richhandley.com, there's links to it from the cover gallery.
Oh, great. That's what I was going to ask. Wow, I can speak English. It's really important. Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
Don't ask me, man. Don't ask me.
Can I ask you a question? No. What I was going to ask next is where people can find you if they want to learn more about your books and your work and everything.
Well, there's this website, richhandley.com. You may have heard of it.
I may have heard of it. Yeah.
And it's Handley, because people always, I think I must slur my last name when I say it, because everyone always says, what was that? So then I hold up my hand and say Handley. It's just the easiest way.
There you go.
Yeah.
So richhandley.com, and on there is my blog where I talk about upcoming things, although I haven't posted to it in a while. And then there's a publications gallery. That's probably the easiest place. They can also find me on Facebook and Twitter.
Excellent. Joe, any other questions for Rich?
No, I don't think so.
Because as usual, we're running long, and then we got to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
We got other bits of business to get to, but now this is
fun.
I would say I very much would like to have Rich back because there's
Definitely.
so much more we can pick his brain about.
Anytime you invite, I will be there. If
Awesome.
you build it, I will come.
I said awesome several times now.
That's iconic.
It is, definitely. So. All right, Rich, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you having you on the show, man. It was fun.
I appreciate you having me. This was great.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Rich.